Well, hello. Welcome back to another exciting edition of Coffee with Steven. When you see me wearing both my suit as well as my colonial hat, you know that this is an important video blog. Um, this one is on HR 127, and I'm sure most of you are probably already aware or probably already heard of this. Um, I purposefully waited a couple of weeks before writing this blog because I really wanted to digest all of the nonsense that's associated with this bill that's been presented to Congress from the esteemed representative from Texas, Sheila Jackson Lee. So a lot of people right now are really concerned about what HR 127 states and what would potentially affect gun owners if it ultimately were to become a law. Let me preface this by saying to you, I don't think it will become a law, and I'll explain why in a little bit. As always, you can read the entire blog and the entire analysis on Wednesday at our website at artemishq.com/blog. But let's kind of get into the heart of the matter. Sheila Jackson Lee, for reasons that, remain completely inexplicable to me, has decided that this is the perfect opportunity to push through the gun control, wet dream. Everything that they could possibly seek to achieve, right? Encapsulated in one bill. And to a large extent, it takes a lot of parts of California's assault weapons laws and things like that and puts them into this as well with some extra extraordinarily onerous things to go along with it. First and foremost, as an individual, whatever firearms you possess prior to this law taking effect, if it ever actually did, you would have to literally register them. And this is not just simply, an AR-15 or a Beretta that you happen to have in a drawer. This is everything. This means if you have grandpa's lever action rifle over the fireplace in the cabin, you got to register that. If you have historical firearms, if you have anything that even smells like a gun, it's going to have to go through a registration process. What's really interesting is that she wants a federal database to be generated with everybody that owns guns, okay? That database is going to be available to certain interested parties. First and foremost, it's going to be available to the general public. So if you're a thief and you're thinking about stealing somebody's guns, the best place to go would be to go to the federal government, do a check to see whether or not the house that you are intending to hit has firearms, and then you break into the house and you steal the guns. Alternatively, if you're a criminal and you want to ensure that the person you are robbing doesn't have a firearm, and this is a dirty little secret that she should have learned from what happened in New York, you can go to this database, find out that they don't have guns, and purposely go after those homes. So either way, the general public is kind of screwed on this one. She also wants to make the list available to law enforcement. Okay, that actually makes some reasonable sense. But then she specifically states that she wants to give this list to the United States Armed Forces. Okay, what the hell is that all about? I mean, this is actually specifically why we created a Second Amendment. All right, so this becomes problematic in and of itself. But fear not, there's more. When you decide that you want to buy a gun, you have to actually first apply for a license for the federal government in order to get this firearm. Now imagine for a little moment here that we weren't talking about guns. Let's say we were talking about the ability to vote, okay? In order to vote, you are going to have to apply for a license by the federal government, right? And the first thing the federal government's going to do is do a criminal background check on you. That makes reasonable sense, right? We do that anyways when we do a gun transfer. Then they're going to require that you get a psychological evaluation. Now, there's no time frame on this psychological evaluation. This could happen at any time. This could happen 5 years from now. There's going to be specifically, enumerated individuals that have been given a license by the federal government to perform this psychological evaluation. We don't know how many there actually are going to be. Right? So you may book an appointment for this psych eval, and you may not be able to get in for another 4 years or anything along those lines, nor are we really instructed who's going to pay for this psychological evaluation. That notwithstanding, the psychologist isn't going to simply interview you. He wants to interview your spouse. He wants to interview your ex-spouse. He wants to interview family members. This broad category of individuals in order to, taking it out of guns for a second, in order to vote. Right? You can see how problematic that would be. They then want to get into the insurance business. The federal government is going to issue you an insurance policy. It's unclear whether it's per gun or per license, but they're going to issue you an insurance policy. It's going to cost you $800 a year. So basically, it's an $800 tax. And then, before you take possession of said firearm, you are going to have to go through 24 hours of training. Now, as a trainer, I kind of like that, right? I mean, that actually could seriously benefit us here at Artemis. That notwithstanding, it's completely unconstitutional, right? Totally violates people's individual liberties. But let's say for the sake of argument, you didn't want to just simply buy a gun. You wanted to get a military-style weapon. Now, what does that mean? What is a military-style weapon? Is this a weapon that's currently being utilized by the military? I don't know. Is this a weapon that was utilized by the military at some recent point in the past? Is this a weapon that was utilized by the military 200 years ago in the past? I mean, the fact of the matter is, at the time of the Revolution, muskets were considered military weapons. So does that mean that a musket now falls within this rubric? Regardless, if you want to get one of these military-style weapons, you are going to have to undergo an additional, I can't remember the exact number. I think it's an additional, it's either an additional 8 or 16 hours of training. Again, we don't know what's actually being taught in these training courses, but it's fairly robust, that notwithstanding. And then it goes through and it lists specifically enumerated firearms that are, replicas or, are made to look like. I mean, it's garbage. I mean, this thing is utter garbage. And let's go back to Grandpa's lever action for a second, sitting over the fireplace. One of the things that you're going to have to do is apply for a special license for that, and you're probably going to have to take it off of the fireplace because you're going to have to establish a certain level of safety associated with the storage of that firearm. That means that when you go into a gun museum, you may not see any guns because they fall outside that scope. Oh, and by the way, if you're one of our brothers and sisters in blue that kind of sit back and relax because, well, as a current or former law enforcement officer, you're typically exempted from these laws. Not anymore. You fall into this as well, all right? Unless you can show that you are active law enforcement and the weapon being acquired is for the purposes of your law enforcement job, you're going to have to go through this same nonsense. This also includes ammunition, background checks, and registration. But now, instead of just being localized exclusively to California, it's now across the entire nation. It's horrible. It's ridiculous. And candidly, I don't think it's ever going to get voted on. All right. And the reason for that, you got to remember the Democrats do not enjoy a massive majority in the House of Representatives. They've got a very slim majority. There are a number of Democrats that live in blue districts, but their constituents own firearms. Okay, they may own a shotgun. They may own Grandpa's lever action. There's a number of, well, now they're going to get suddenly saddled with a psychological evaluation as well as an $800 tax. And that may be enough to really piss them off. As a result, there is a very, very strong possibility that a simple vote on this bill might actually put them in jeopardy of being able to retain their seats in the next election cycle, a mere 23 months away. As a result, I don't think this is actually going to come up as an actual bill to be voted on. I think Nancy Pelosi is smart enough to realize that this is going to potentially end her speakership. Now, let's assume for the sake of argument that politics be damned, they're going to move forward. It gets voted on and it gets passed. I think the same analysis takes place over in the Senate. I don't think that the senators are going to ultimately vote on this thing. But again, let's assume for the sake of argument that they do. All right. And of course, Joe Biden decides to sign it. I don't think that it's going to withstand. In fact, I know it's not going to withstand constitutional muster. Not only does it violate egregiously the Second Amendment to the Constitution, it also affects the First Amendment to the Constitution and the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution. So there's a number, and technically speaking, even the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution. So there's a number of different legal theories that could be used to overturn this, and I think ultimately speaking, the Supremes would do just that. So yeah, it sucks. It's horrible. It's a terrible piece of legislation. You should probably be aware of what is actually in it. And we talk about that in the blog. But I don't want you losing a lot of sleep over it either. In any event, I want you to train constantly, train consistently, train repetitively, and train with purpose. Above all else, stay safe.